I want to introduce Tony Thompson first. Tony is a candidate in Iowa House District 45, which is the rural part of Polk, which is up in northeast part of Polk. And Tony does not have a primary opponent, and but he does have a general election, and it'll be a tough general election. Of course, it'll be for most of our candidates in the rural communities around Iowa. But with that short introduction, Tony, I'm going to give the floor to you. And again, you'll have up to 6 minutes to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your campaign. The floor is yours, Tony.
All right. Thanks, Mitch. Well, I tend to keep it short and sweet, so we'll see here. I'm getting better about timing things just right. I'm Tony Thompson. I grew up here on our family century farm 2 miles east of Elkhart. So native to the district. From a district standpoint, it's this really interesting space in Polk County because it is the district that goes from the Grimes-Johnston, the edge of Grimes and Johnston, all the way along the edge of Polk County. It turns here near Elkhart and goes down. So it's included Polk City, Allman, Sheldall, Elkhart, and then turns and goes towards Bondurant, Mitchellville, right along the edge of Altoona down to Runnels. So it's a quite big district. I'm running here again, a native of the area, 4th generation century farm, and just deep connections. So you mentioned it'll be a difficult election because my opponent will be the lottery winning lawyer from Bondurant, Brian Losey. He's not had to run in the north half of this district, so that gives me some hope. And I'm just going to outwork him. I mean, I won't outspend the guy that won the lottery 10 years ago, but I will outwork him. We're making calls already, and just trying to listen to what people are, what the issues are for voters in this district. So I think that's more important than what my position is. Although I will say that there's, a lot of the reasons that I got into the race started with one on the farmers union side of things. So the farmers union is a pretty progressive farm organization that's been known to be a little on the rascally side, maybe historically. I mean, it's really, in a lot of ways, I don't want to steal the word progressive, but it is a progressive organization within the state of Iowa, certainly. So we're the organization that's supporting small family farms. We're the organization that from a farming standpoint or an agricultural standpoint is saying we need to be improving water quality. We need to be doing something about the cancer rates that are being increased by the overuse or the misuse of the pesticides and things that are being sprayed on our crops and too close, I think, to our towns and communities and playgrounds and ball fields. So between that and then I've got daughters that are 4 and 6. The 4-year-old, they're both enrolled here at public school. So my pre-kindergartner this year is in the classroom where I had kindergarten, and my kindergarten student was in the class that I had first grade. So it's the connections to the district, and my desire, like I said, I've been here in the district for 4 generations now, or my family has been, and I want my girls to want to be in Iowa 4 generations from now, or their kids and their grandkids, right? So it's not a state that I recognize. And I want to get it back to being better. What I'm good at, I think, is taking the best of the past and the present and combining it with emerging ideas and emerging things that are coming out. So more about me from an introductory standpoint. I grew up here. I went away. I lived overseas for a few years. I had that kind of global experience. I did my PhD in Sweden in sustainable product innovation. And then about 10 years ago, I moved back here to the family farm to see if I could earn my living the way that my grandparents did from the land. I grew vegetables. I had 2 or 3 acre CSA for a couple of years. I got married, had the kids, and that wasn't providing enough income. I kept my hand in that local food space and also started, we bought a delivery business. Our family bought a delivery business called Prudent Produce that is now one of the state's leading food hubs. And so we buy produce from 80 or 90 other, produce and meat and dairy and all kinds of things from 80 or 90 other Iowa farms. And we aggregate that here in a grain bin, a building that my grandfather built 60 years ago to store grain in that we've renovated. And we deliver that out to 250 households around central and north central Iowa. We're also involved in this local food promotion assistance program, and that helps us to deliver produce and other local foods into some food pantries. So there's about a dozen pantries that we partner with. And then by day, I do data science for a fintech organization, a financial technology company in the ag space, working to do some pretty innovative things on agricultural practices at a industrial level, but doing some positive things like encouraging the adoption of cover crops. So it was some things on the edge of progressive agriculture. So why am I've been a member of the Iowa Unity Coalition for about 4 years. I don't remember exactly when I started. It was during COVID when I was hearing about what the group was doing, and Mitch and others were doing a lot of good work then. So I got kind of excited about that, and I started listening in on Zoom calls while I was taking my kids to the park. And so now I find myself running for office, and here I sit, Mitch, at 5 minutes and 50 seconds. I'll hand it back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony. I do appreciate it. So I have a couple questions for you. So the first one is on workers' rights. We asked the question on workers' rights about a minimum wage or a living wage, as some folks like to call it. And so we just like to ask you, would you support a state minimum wage or living wage at $20 an hour or higher, indexed annually for inflation?
Yes.
Thank you, Tony.
I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know that there's a lot to elaborate on. What I go back to is 20 years ago, I started working with Habitat for Humanity, and our catchphrase was a simple, decent place to live. And I'm working on trying to figure out the language to use around that for wages today. I think people need simple, decent wages or simple, appropriate living wages. So help me find the perfect way to phrase that. But absolutely, if you're working 40 hours a week or less, even like we need to reduce the stress around the economic things in our lives. And paying living wages is the way to do that.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. And that's one of the major reasons we have that question there. Not too long ago, probably about 5 years ago, there were several communities around Iowa, including counties and metropolitan areas around the state, both larger and smaller, that were passing ordinances at that time for a $15 minimum wage. But unfortunately, like the state has done over the last several years, they've passed new legislation that would prevent that, of course, at this point. Hopefully with some new Democrats there over these next several years, maybe you could take the majority again in the House or Senate. Maybe that could be changed, including the governorship. So, I mean, we're very supportive of that as a group, and have been since we put this group together. Okay,
Can I
let's
say
go
one
on
more
to
thing
our.
real quick?
Yes,
It's
Tony, go
always
ahead.
dangerous if I start talking more than I need to, but I would like to say that one of the things that really irks me is the guaranteed income bill or the blocking of the guaranteed income. I think that is a really interesting program, and we need the research that's being done now by the organization providing that. I'm going to blank on the name, but they're providing $500 for working families. My understanding is there's no actual requirement tied to it, and I think that's where it's in conflict then with the legislation. So they're able to continue the pilot through the January 2025. But I don't understand why the legislature would block that. That's what.
Because I know, as you know, in Polk County, the Polk County supervisors were involved with initiating that plan. I think you were talking about last year, and of course the legislators go in this session and block it. So there's fortunate there's some private groups out there that will assist with that at this point. Okay, our second question. This is on education. So under education, under 1B, the governor recently introduced a bill for a $50,000 starting wage for teachers. In your opinion, is this sufficient? If not, what would be the starting salary? What would starting salary be? And I know there are some of our folks that have answered this question over the last 3 months. They've had some issues with it. So and I know with you, 50,000 is a lot of money in a rural community, but it's not as much like in the city of Des Moines, or maybe even in Iowa City or Cedar Rapids. So with that, I mean, I'm gonna give it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is dangerous territory for me because I will go professorial on you, right? I want to pull out the chalkboard and start doing some numbers because that's where my mind goes. And from a communication standpoint, supporting 50,000 as a teacher salary is yes, absolutely. Just doing anything to increase what our public educators are being paid is a good thing at this point. The challenge for me, Mitch, and that's what, I don't know if I got me in trouble, but needed to clarify is just the nuance of that. So as an incoming legislator, yeah, I need the message of the 50K or whatever that salary is. But then the nuance is how do you do that? And it needs one to be indexed for inflation so that we're not having this conversation every year. Like that needs to be built in. We're underfunding schools now when we give a 2.5% increase in the education budget when inflation is 4%. Like that's not fair. And that comes back. So absolutely indexing for inflation. Um, there's just a conversation. We've got what 35,500 public school teachers in the state, and so the implications on a budget. I mean, as an incoming legislator, again, I need to be conscious of the impact of that, and also acknowledge that it's the amount of surplus, like it's less than the surplus to give to increase teacher pay to that level. So, help me here, Mitch. What
You
specific
know,
question?
that's a reasonable answer. I think you did well with it, and it elaborates more that what you had down there, and I do agree with a lot of folks who fill out these questionnaires. They're best if they keep it short because sometimes if they go too long, then the answer's on the other side of the coin. So you did good responding to it. Thank you very much, Tony. Okay, this is your third and last question from us tonight. This is also under education. Uh, and yeah, this is also under education. I'm going to ask this too. Two, should public post-secondary education, including trade schools, be free to students? What limitations would you apply? And you did answer yes on this to begin with in your first sentence. But what we would like is uh, at least to start with that your community colleges and your trade schools be free to start with. Um, and I know there's always budget constraints with that. Uh, but what we'd like eventually, sooner than later, is for like our four-year universities from Iowa State, UNI, University of Iowa, also to be tuition free. And with that, I'm going to give it to you then.
Yeah, the overarching thing for me is that education is an investment in our future. And so, yeah, I think it's an investment in our future, and we need to figure out how to make it accessible and affordable to people. And if making it free for everybody is the way to do that, or if it's providing scholarships for folks who need it, I don't know the nuance and the details. I absolutely support post-high school, post-secondary education and making that accessible to people.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. We have 2.5 minutes remaining, so the floor is yours to talk a little bit more about yourself or your campaign. I'll give you a 30-second out once we get to it.
I honestly would rather be listening to y'all, and I've got two ears and one mouth, and I'm here and I'm running, and I like what the Unity Coalition stands for, and I like what people are working towards, and